The Pope is utterly and completely wrong. Visitors and newcomers to St Mary Abbots might not all be surprised to hear so vehement a statement from the lips of a Church of England vicar. Those of you who are more frequent and regular members of this congregation may, on the other hand, be rather surprised to hear such sentiments from my lips, because I'm noted for rather inclining to listen to everything the Pope says and ignore everything the Archbishop of Canterbury might mention on any subject. The Pope, utterly and completely wrong, is not Pope Francis, but Pope St Gregory the Great, who in the 6th century pronounced definitively that Mary Magdalene and the woman, the sinner notorious in the city, who anointed Jesus' feet with precious ointment and cleaned them with the hair of her head, were one and the same person. Oh, no, they're not. It's completely and utterly untrue. It's an engagement, rather an identification, which simply is not borne out by Scripture. Scripture makes it very clear that they're completely different people. The one is a sinner, well known in the city, and then later on, Mary Magdalene is introduced to us as one of the band of women who helped to support the ministry of the church, presumably a woman of some wealth, some standing, some stature, from whom, this Mary Magdalene, Jesus cast out 7 devils. No sign whatsoever of being a notorious sinner, and either way, there's also no sign whatsoever, no indication that the notorious sin was of a sexual nature, because, of course, Mary Magdalene, the one thing we all know about Mary Magdalene was that she was a reformed prostitute. Oh, no, she wasn't. A completely different other people, but so powerful is that mistaken, and I might say malicious, identification, that it may be that we might learn a little bit about ourselves, or the church anyway, by exploring it for a moment. It's so powerful that shortly our choir will sing a wonderful anthem, which is utterly completely wrong. Nothing whatsoever. You'll see that some clever person has, in the text of the anthem, there you are, when Jesus sat at meat, has put one little phrase in square brackets. Oh, I did. Because if you look at Luke chapter 7, it's not there. It's actually the beginning of chapter 8 when he does talk about it. So in other words, this is a lie. It's a total fib. And you see, such is the power of music and the power of art, that what we hear and what we see becomes the truth. And it's not the truth. Of course, we've never been in this church one to allow boring stuff like the truth get in the way of enjoying a good tune, so you know that we'll thoroughly enjoy the anthem when it's sung, but it's actually nothing to do with Mary Magdalene. It's to do with another woman altogether, a woman whose name we never learn. So interested was the early church in the figure of Mary Magdalene, the real one, the one who really did exist, that actually all sorts of other bits and pieces were added to her that belonged to other people called Mary, and other people whose names we don't know. What we do know about Mary Magdalene is wonderful and fantastic, and it's illustrated by that wonderful image on the front of our order of service. Mary Magdalene was the first witness to the resurrection. That's all. Only, you might say, the most central person in the whole of the Christian story. It's Mary of Magdala to whom Jesus appears first of all after his resurrection, with the news that he's risen from the dead, and given his first resurrection instruction, go and tell the others, which she does. She is known as the apostle to the apostles. Those 12 disciples still cowering in fear and uncertainty in the upper room, they had to wait for Mary to tell them the truth. There's a problem here. There's a rather big problem, an awkward, an embarrassing problem. And the problem is this: they were men, and she was a woman. And I think it's not entirely fanciful to conclude that the reason all these other legends attached themselves to the name of Mary Magdalene was in a no doubt subconscious attempt somehow to hollow out that truth of Easter morning, that Jesus first appeared to a woman and entrusted the gospel, the good news, the resurrection story to a woman whose name does not even appear in the list of the 12. My suspicion is that for a church which for most of its history has been dominated by men and maleness, this was actually rather too embarrassing and awkward a fact to celebrate by itself. So much easier to think of Mary Magdalene as a reformed prostitute. As I say, there's nothing whatsoever about the woman who does wipe the feet of Jesus with her hair to say she's a prostitute, by the way, just as a notorious sinner, which actually could mean a whole range of things. But a prostitute is what the church seemed to like, or like her to have been. And one of the legends which stuck particularly is that after the resurrection, she then spends her whole life in penitence. All sorts of paintings of her in a cave. This is another assimilation, by the way. Those are the legends of Mary of Egypt. They get stuck to that Mary. It's extraordinary the way that happens. This accretion of other material that get lumped together under the story of Mary Magdalene. She spends the rest of her life in penitence. We might ask, why? What for? Even if she had been a prostitute, anyone who's ever done any work among what are now known as sex workers know that actually people put into that position are normally there because of appalling economic, social, even political reasons. And it may well be the people who need to spend their lives in penitence are the people who pay for their services, without whom, of course, there would be no prostitutes and no prostitution. Where does the moral guilt lie? Clearly, it seems to me, not with that woman or with such women. It's an extraordinarily pervasive image, beloved of artists through the ages. Any number of paintings of Mary of Magdala, because they're allowed to paint her with her hair down. Again, it's something we can't quite do. I noticed that none of you women are dressed properly this morning. Where are your hats to wear in church? I don't know. Because, of course, it's relatively recently that it was thought to be decent for women to show their hair to anyone other than their husband. We've rather lost that, thank heavens. But a very pervasive fact of ancient societies, and of course many societies in our own day, that a woman's hair was of such extraordinary power and influence over poor, weak and weedy men that she had to hide it, or no one could be responsible for the terrible consequences. And the lovely thing for an artist about painting Mary Magdalene was you were allowed to show her hair. And so we see lots and lots of pictures of Mary with her tresses down. Not just that, because of her profession, we see lots and lots of pictures of Mary Magdalene where her blouse appears to be halfway off for some reason or other. Once again, of course, painters always liked painting women with no clothes on. And the great thing was, they were allowed to, in this case. Of course, the Christianity following Judaism, a notoriously prudish religion. Had to be very, very covered up. But this was great. You could get away with it here. You could get away with it. So all these painters, all these artists, they are to blame. Well, no. Actually, it's very recent indeed that anyone has ever painted a picture or a fresco unless someone else paid for it and commissioned it. So to whom does the guilt impute? Those who pay. Those who pay. All this entirely false additional material attached to poor Mary Magdalene, who's gone through the Christian centuries famous for something that she wasn't and for doing something she never did, is of course because of human prurience, to do with a short three-letter word. It's to do with sex. Something that we're not supposed to think important or powerful, but of course which is important and profoundly powerful. And the great thing about this legendary and untrue story, legends, myths attaching to St. Mary Magdalene, meant that it allowed you to get it both ways. You could both think about a woman who misbehaved herself in a way that you knew you should not yourself, and also think, because of a life of penitence, she jolly well paid for it. In other words, there's an area, there is a sense of almost sadistic pleasure in the fact that she had to spend the rest of her life in a cave because of who and what she was. Well, that's jolly interesting history, and perhaps interesting art history, and perhaps interesting about the history of the church. Clearly hasn't got much to do with us, because we have grown out, I hope, of such ways of thinking and doing. Yes, but it does, I think, illustrate a very powerful urge in the human condition, which is always to choose the sensational, the really exciting, over what might be the truth. And the truth of Mary Magdalene could not be more wonderful. The real truth, that she is the first witness to the resurrection. She's the one entrusted with the gospel, the good news of Jesus. She's the one entrusted with telling others that Christ is risen from the dead. What could be more wonderful than that? Why do we need to add all this extra stuff? Why do we need to pander to that which is worst in our makeup? And it may just be that there are elements of our own life where we do recognize just these same impulses. Always to choose the most sensational, the most exciting. And of course, the great thing about Mary Magdalene was it was someone very different from what you were. You never behaved like that. Certainly not. You'd have nothing to do with that kind of person. So it distances you. It's about distancing, where actually there is a real and wonderful and glorious challenge, which is this: how much do we pass on the news of the resurrection? How much do we share with those around us the one great fact, the one great fact since the creation of the world, that Christ is risen from the dead. Death hath no more dominion over him. Amen. Amen.